Good Saturday morning, YouTube family. Apple Stump Bushcraft Stuffin' Things coming at you today with another Stuffin' Things adventure and episode. We like to do a little paper punching now and then with various firearms. Sometimes we borrow one from one friend or another, and they expect them to be returned in pristine or at least clean and serviceable condition after a good round of shooting at the range. So today we have just one such firearm. This is a Ruger LCP light compact pistol in .380 caliber, and it has a nice DeSantis brand pocket holster. So first thing we're going to do before we clean the guns is remember rule number 1, all guns are always loaded. But this gun is in fact loaded. So we're not going to touch the trigger. We release the magazine. Make sure the magazine is empty of all 6 rounds. Place the rounds in a container. Remove the round from the chamber. And with this particular pistol we can lock back the action and demonstrate that it is in fact completely unloaded. The next thing we're going to do is remove the live rounds from the room and place them somewhere else. So we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, here we have a verified empty handgun. And here we have verified empty magazine. We have some 100% cotton patches that we're going to be cutting to size to run down the bore. And we have a bore scope light. It's just a light. So you put it in the bore and you can get an idea of how the rifling is and how dirty it is in there. Then we have a little kit marketed by Cabela's, which contains all the tools we're going to need inside. And we use this particular extension as the end of the rod system because it swivels. And although the barrel is only a little longer than this, we still want the end to swivel, so we're going to put on a phosphor bronze brush first of all, and we do no harm to the rifling that way. So with a pair of scissors we're going to cut these rather large patches in half. And make them a little bit more appropriate size for the bore diameter. 380 pistol fires a bullet that is nominally 0.356 inches in diameter. It's a 9mm style bullet. So you can see when we double these over, we'll push the cleaning jag through there, saturated with a solution of bore solvent, and it'll be just the right size to catch the lands and the grooves and clean the inside of the barrel. Alright, so let's begin to disassemble this pistol. It's quite easy to do. Ruger has built in a slide stop just for the convenience of inspection. It really doesn't lock back after the last round, at least not on this model. So this button here I'm going to depress. I'm going to depress this button, hold onto the slide, and release it forward. Then I'm going to take a screwdriver and just pry this pin up and out and lay it aside. Now the slide group will slide off of the frame, and we can remove the recoil spring, which is a double spring wrapped around a little rod. And the barrel comes up and out of the slide assembly. And that's all there is to field stripping this particular firearm. Now, what's peculiar about Ruger's small pistols and some other ones like Taurus is these pins that they use. You can see one right here possibly, and another one back here, and that one. They tend to creep a little bit as you fire the firearm. So we'll take a brass mallet and just pound them back to where they're even. They're not sticking out one side more than the other. The brass doesn't harm the surface of the firearm in any way. Sometimes they won't go all the way back over without the addition of a punch, and so we use a punch to move that one just a little bit. And there we go. So they're back into position, looking pretty good. Now, people have their preferences about solvents. I happen to like Hoppy's number 9. This is not a sponsored video. Hoppy's didn't pay for this. I bought this quart-sized bottle of Hoppy's number 9 a number of years ago at retail, and it's still half full. Lasts a long time. Hoppy's number 9 is generally good for removing fouling from firearms that have been shooting copper plated bullets, and even lead. There are some better, more effective solvents available on the market for removing lead from high velocity firearms such as rifles, but generally speaking, if you're shooting lead through a pistol, Hoppy's will take it out, and any of the other solvents that you might find on the market, if you read the label, you'll find that they'll also take lead out of the bore. So what I like to do is to have a little container to put small parts in. So that's the linchpin. I don't want to lose that. The double spring and the spring guide, recoil spring, you can go in there, and that way they don't get misplaced and lost. Lost is bad when it comes to little parts. What I've done is taken some of the Hoppy's number 9 and transferred it into this little bottle for convenience, because it's much easier to see and manipulate. There's no particular order that I go in cleaning guns. I like to take some solvent and we'll just put that in there too, and clean the magazine follower. Depress it a little bit and catch the lips of the magazine. It's really not necessary to disassemble semi-automatic magazines unless you're shooting a lot of lead bullets that have lubricant on the outside. Sometimes the gas from the heated lubricant will find its way down inside there and gum up the works. But generally speaking, nitro powder residue doesn't affect magazine performance all that much. Most magazines have a takedown button, and this one is no exception. You can see it right there. If I wanted to take this magazine apart, all I'd have to do is depress that, slide the foot of it off, and I would have access to the spring and the follower, and I could do a real thorough cleaning inside of there, but it's not necessary with this particular weapon. It's only been fired with full metal jacket ammunition, no exposed lead, and there's just nothing in there but carbon fouling. So we'll take that, and sometimes we'll take a brush if there's a lot of it, and clean it better that way. So since I mentioned it, this is a nylon brush that I use on parts of guns such as magazines. I don't like to use the stainless steel brushes on guns. There's a place for them, but generally speaking, no place that I approve of. So there's magazine is essentially clean for all intents and purposes. Its functionality should be just fine. It's normal. Magazines typically don't need to be oiled. The only moving part in there is the spring and the follower, and there's no close tolerances in there to worry about jamming up. So as long as you get the powder residue off of there, you're probably doing pretty good. For the spring, this happens to be a double spring, one inside another, with a spring guide. So we'll take that out and wipe the spring guide down with our patch that's been saturated with Hoppy's number 9. Place it back in there so it goes through both springs. And sometimes if the springs seem pretty dirty, what I'll do is take the patch and hold it in there in the grooves of the springs and just rotate it back and forth. And of course you could take a shallow vessel of some kind and soak the springs in it. So once again we'll put the spring guide and the springs in there. This is now clean stuff. It doesn't take very much of the Hoppy's number 9 to do most of the things that need to be done. So what we're going to do now is take the saturated patch and this nylon brush, and I'm going to clean the slide rails, which are pretty much the metal part. They constitute the frame of this gun. They are the firearm. If you remove this assembly right here that's made of metal, that's the firearm. That's the part with the serial number on it. So we're going to go down inside of there with our patch. Notice that it's getting a little bit darker with carbon fouling. I'd like to wrap the end of the brush around it and get in there where I can't reach with my fingers down in the magazine well. And then there's a few spots up here. And you can see that the copper, or not the copper, you can see that the Hoppy's number 9 solvent is doing a pretty good job of removing the burnt powder fouling, which is about all that accumulates in there. Now I'll take the brush and do the rails, slide rails, down inside the magazine well, and the front part of the hammer right here. This is the hammer right there. And this patch is looking kind of tired, so I think I will discard it and we'll soak another one with some of the Hoppy's. smells kind of like bananas, ripe bananas. And go across that again. I see with the brush we've liberated even more carbon fouling. To the best of my knowledge, Hoppies doesn't harm plastic, such as is used in firearms frames these days. This particular firearm has been fired probably 200 times since it was cleaned last. Some people argue for cleaning after so many X number of rounds should be disassembled and cleaned. If that's their preference, I don't have anything against it. Doesn't seem to matter to me. I don't shoot this particular firearm in competition. Now we can use our flashlight to see how clean things are down in there. They look pretty good. The mainspring, which is down in here in this part of the pistol, looks pretty clean. Magazine well looks pretty clean. I may make another pass through there with this brush just to get rid of any cotton from the patches. And then I may run this newer patch down through there one more time. And it came out essentially as clean as it went in, so that's good. Now we use a dry one, dry patch, to remove the excess Hoppies. Hoppies number 9 solvent has been around for a long time, probably close to 100 years if not longer. And I started using it when I was 12 years old and had to clean my shotgun after my brother and I went jackrabbit hunting. And it's always done a good job for me. Okay, so we have essentially the frame of the gun clean and ready to go. Now I see that there's looks like salt, possibly, in there where it says Ruger. This gun gets carried in a pocket holster, and so salt or grime from a pocket would tend to fill up any little niches that are on the outside of the gun. There isn't any on this side, and this is the outside. Okay, I pronounced that clean enough. You have to know, as artists say, you have to know when to put the brush down, and I proclaim that to be clean enough. So we'll set the dirty patches aside. Next thing that we're going to do is clean the slide assembly. The slide assembly is not able to be taken down any further than it is right here without special tools and special knowledge, and there isn't any reason to, really. So we'll take another patch and saturate it with Hoppies. And I think we have actually 2 patches here, which will work fine. I'll just set one aside. And it's a tight fit down in there, so I use a Smith & Wesson screwdriver to get that patch down in the rail guides. And then I can get the rest of it with my finger pretty much. I can tell I have a little cut on my finger because the Hoppies is stinging it quite a bit. It's just about like alcohol. I'm not sure what the contents are, but they're volatile. Pretty certain of that. So what this does is, since this patch is pretty well saturated, it gets the solvent down in there in a quantity such that it can do its job pretty well. And we want to also pay attention to the bolt face, and that would be that part right there. I don't know if you can see it, where the firing pin hole is. Here's the extractor, this little part right here, and the little hole right there is the firing pin hole. So we want to make sure that that's pretty clean. Now, to get underneath the extractor, I used the fine teeth of this nylon bristle brush to get underneath there. And then the bolt face I can clean with the bigger bristles. We'll discard that patch in favor of a fresh one that has hoppies on it. And you can see that compared to the last one, there's not much carbon fouling left in there. Sometimes I'll use the plastic bristles of the brush to force the solvent-laden patch into areas that it normally wouldn't reach, or a screwdriver or some small implement. And we'll use a clean dry one to mop it up. Ruger uses a patented coating on their steel parts. And generally speaking, I've never seen any rust develop, even though this particular gun is carried in a pocket. Sometimes when that pocket is surrounded by sweat. I've still never seen one of these rust. I suppose it's possible. It's just about anything you can think of is possible. And all that remains now to be cleaned, so I want to check and make sure there are no cotton fibers left over in here. So I give it a good brushing with the nylon brush. And it looks like I have just a little bit of debris left back here. I'll try to get that out. It's mostly just pocket dust, I think. But it's around the striker part of the firing pin where it receives the blow from the hammer. Looks okay now. So we'll set that aside under the principle of you have to know when to put the brush down. Last thing we have to clean is the barrel. And the barrel is about 2 1/4 inches long, something like that. Marked on the side, 380 auto. So that tells you what caliber it can shoot. Instead of having a bushing at the end of the gun, the barrel is flared at the muzzle, so it fits just perfectly within the frame. And we're going to use a clean patch with solvent. For this portion. And what I like to do is first, dip the phosphor bronze brush into the hoppies. And run it through the bore a few times from the breech to the muzzle and then back. That saturates the inside of the bore and starts to loosen any fouling that's in there. And what I want to do now is wait a few minutes. You can see on my hands here how much came out. We'll wait a few minutes for that to soften up any fouling that remains in there, and we'll come back and scrub it out with a jag and a patch. So here we have the barrel, and we'll make a few more passes with the phosphor bronze brush. Try saying that 3 times fast. I just washed my hands, and you can see already there's some fouling on there. So here's the patch that I wetted with Hoppies number 9 for the purpose of cleaning the barrel. Now the barrel incorporates more than just the bore in the barrel. It also incorporates the articulation for the pin right here. This is a Locked-Breech system similar to the 45 automatic designed by John Browning, where the barrel and the slide travel together a short distance until the pressure inside the barrel is released when the bullet exits. Then they unlock, the slide continues back, extracts the empty round of brass from the chamber, and on return motion strips a new cartridge from the magazine into the chamber and is ready to fire again. As opposed to a blowback, which has no pin device typically between the barrel and the frame, and relies simply on a strong spring to retard the motion of the slide rearward from the blowback caused by action versus reaction. That old law of Newton's: for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So in a blowback pistol, when the cartridge discharges, the force of the barrel, the momentum of the bullet traveling down the barrel has the effect of forcing the barrel to the rear, or the slide in this case, because most blowback pistols the barrel is pinned to the frame. So it forces the slide back along with the extractor against the tension of a pretty stout spring. Once the see how much dirt came out of that barrel. That's mostly carbon fouling. There's probably a little bit of copper in there, but not much. We don't shoot this pistol at speeds to where copper fouling is really an issue. Anyway, once the blowback slide has reached the far end of its travel and the extracted round has been pushed away from the pistol, the recoil spring takes over, shoves the slide back forward. Part of the slide strips another round off the magazine and chambers it. Blowback pistols tend to have more recoil, in my experience. That may or may not be true from a physics point of view, but from an experiential point of view, I've fired 380s in both blowback and locked breech, and even delayed blowback systems. And I found the ones that have the locked breech seem to have the least recoil, at least the least felt recoil of any of them. So that bore is clean now. We'll take a look at it with this little inspection tool. I'm going to look at it this way. It's very bright and shiny, and I don't know if you can see that or not. You can make out the lands and grooves of the rifling quite well, and this way allows you to visualize the chamber and make sure that there's no abnormalities in the chamber that would cause problems next time you fire the gun. So with the bore, chamber, muzzle, and lug, which is what this is called down here, clean enough, pay a little attention to the feed ramp. The feed ramp is right there. That's the part that encourages the next round of ammunition to slide up into the chamber. And Ruger does a good job of polishing and angling their feed ramps. I've never had a failure to feed with a Ruger semi-automatic pistol, including this one. So pay some attention to the feed ramp. We'll remove the excess solvent. Use a dry patch to go down the bore and remove any excess solvent also out of the chamber. From the chamber end, we'll double it. Push it down through there with the jag. I like to run it back and forth a little bit like this. And you can see the patch emerge from the bore. And what's left on there is mostly brown, which means that that's not fouling, that's actually solvent. So it has removed the excess Hoppy's solvent. So now we're at the point where we want to put this pistol back together and make it ready to carry again. This is an everyday carry style pistol. That means that it's meant for carrying all the time, wherever you go, wherever it's legal for you or me or whoever is concerned to carry a handgun. So, first of all, invert the slide assembly. Insert the barrel muzzle first. Retract it until it locks up with the slide. Then we'll take the spring. There's two ends to that. You can see that that end has a rather flat stopper on it, and this end has free spring on it. The flat stopper end attaches to a little notch on the barrel, lug, and it stops right there. Now, the tricky part. People do this part different ways. This is the pin that retains the whole thing together. And there's a little detent. You may not be able to see it, but I'll try to point it out. There's a little detent spring right in there, in that hole. And you have to be sure that the pin depresses that. So what I like to do is just start that in there, like so. I want to make sure that when I look inside the gun, the pin is not actually poking through there and is not going to retard reconstruction of the gun to its normal position. And I see that it isn't. It's in there just far enough to hold that detent spring down. So what we do, once again, make sure that spring is at the right place on the slide. Match up the slide rails with the grooves they go in. Before I do that, I usually like to put a drop or two of lubricant where the slide rails will work, and allow that to drizzle down. Sometimes invert it again. Now, these are the slide rails, and the slide rail grooves are right in there. Match those up. Just like that, so they slide normally. I want to slide that back till it meets this end flush. Push that pin back all the way through. Work the action a few times just to make sure it works. And make sure we can lock the slide back using the slide lock button right there. Now with this particular model of Ruger LCP, which stands for Light Compact Pistol, there's no automatic hold open when you've reached the last round, so you have to get used to counting. The magazine holds 6, the chamber holds 1, so you have a total carrying this pistol in condition 1 of 7 rounds. 6 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. If you get in a firefight, or if you're shooting at the range, you have to know that if you started off with 7 rounds and you count your rounds as you fire them, when you fired 7 you're out, even though the slide isn't locked back as you see it now. You're empty and you need to do something about that. I'm going to continue to wipe down the exterior of the frame here. Again, there's no magazine in the magazine well, and there's no round of ammunition inside. So we have an empty weapon here. Sometimes I blow on it to remove any little balls of cotton from the patches. So now we're kind of tidying up a little bit. I put all the used patches inside this cup and separated them. All the cleaning implements are over to the side. And we have the magazine. I've reintroduced the ammunition. And I washed my hands pretty good too. One thing you don't want to have when you're reloading ammunition into a magazine is you don't want to have any traces of solvent on your hands or on the magazine. So this is a typical fashion that you reload. Push down, insert the round primer end first towards the back of the magazine. This magazine holds 6. And it appears to be full. Got 1 round left over. There's 2 ways to recharge a firearm. You can simply drop the new round in there and carefully close the slide, or you can insert the slide, retract it slightly, let it go, and now there's a round in the chamber and 5 left in the magazine. Release the magazine and replace that 6th round. Seat it firmly, and this pistol is ready to go. Now comes the fun part. As we say, borrowing from Jeff Cooper's 4 rules of safe gun handling. All guns are always loaded. Never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Never point a firearm at anything that you're not willing to destroy. And always be sure of your target and what's behind it. So I don't have my finger on the trigger. I will never have my finger on the trigger unless I'm on the range or on some other target that I intend to shoot. So my finger's alongside the trigger guard, and that's where it will stay. So this is a fully charged weapon. You can see there's a witness hole right there, and that shows me that there's a round of brass, at least brass, supposed to be loaded ammunition, but at least there's a round of brass inside there, and that tells me be extra careful if I wasn't already being careful. So no part of my anatomy or anybody else's anatomy should be on the forward end of that firearm. My finger should not be on the trigger. I'm going to insert it back into the pocket holster like so and set it off to the side. Now when I get up later and start walking around and so forth, the pocket holster will go back in my pocket. I will have my finger on the outside of it as I slide it in there, and you can see that the trigger guard and the trigger are protected by that holster. One of the things that a pocket holster does is it keeps lint from getting into the bore of the handgun. It's quite good for that. This has a hole in the bottom of it, but it still doesn't allow any lint to get inside. If there is a ball of lint inside the bore of your handgun when you fire it, you have a good chance of an explosion happening. It depends on the pressure of the round as it goes down the barrel, how far down the barrel the lint is. If it's just right at the very muzzle, chances are it won't happen. But if it's down inside of there sitting on top of the bullet, there's a chance that the pressure will build beyond the ability of the chamber to withstand it, and you're going to have a kaboom happen. I've had a kaboom happen 2 different times due to ammunition failure. It hurts a lot and it's not fun. Stings your hand like crazy, sometimes leaves cuts and jags and tears and bruises. Sometimes it breaks fingers. So be particularly careful to guard against accumulation of lint and other debris inside the muzzle of your gun. Okay, so this concludes a little how-to cleaning lesson for the Ruger LCP 380 caliber light compact pistol. And this is one that's meant for everyday carry, and that's what I use it for. So that's the long and short of it. This is my everyday carry pistol, and once again, we never touch the trigger until we're on target and ready to shoot. This has been Apple Stump Bushcraft with a short demonstration on how to clean and care for a small compact pistol. Wishing you a good weekend and a safe weekend. Have fun, enjoy yourselves, enjoy your families, stay safe. Adios.